Hey guys, so in this video we are going to talk about globals. So let's get into it. Now, globals, this is a good one. Global scoped variables and global stuff. Now, let's define what global means first and foremost. So global, for the juniors out there, means that, as you may have realized, as you write software, we have this thing we call scoping. And a scope is basically the section of code which has access to different properties, such as variables, for example, like a function, the function body. Inside of that code, depending on your language, of course, you may have access to most likely everything that is inside that function body, but in certain situations you may have access to things that lives outside of said function body. Take Java, for example, where you have access to the object's field variables. But when something is globally available to you, that means that every single piece of code that you write within the entire application has access to this thing. A good example, if you're in JavaScript lang, the window object, for example, window.location, or the document and so forth, that is something that is globally accessible to the entire code. Now, you may or may not have heard that there are some more experienced programmers out there who will tell you that global state and global scope is dangerous, you should avoid it at all costs. And for the most part, they are absolutely right about this, because if we take JavaScript, for example, one of the trickiest parts about traditional JavaScript development is that if everything is living in the global space, that means that you have to you basically have to have a unique variable name for everything. You have to have a unique function name for everything, because everything has access to everything. And it's very easy for you to overwrite things and so forth. So ideally, what you want to achieve is the scoping concept that we talked about, where you want to isolate some code from some other code. But does that mean that there are no use cases for these globals? Well, actually, this is where I want to go in, and I will say that I think that globals have gotten a little bit of a bad rap. I think that what happened, and this was very common back in my PHP days, so I think that maybe you can relate, but there was a time where there was this trend where people would willy-nilly declare things in the global context of their PHP code, and in JavaScript as well, of course. And because this trend existed for so long and nobody really thought about it, you got really shitty software produced by people consistently. And as things kind of moved along, more and people got really fed up and frustrated with this global thing, and now everybody went to the other extreme and they never use globals for any reason, and they avoid it at all costs. It's very similar to, I know that if you do, say, Java or C# and so forth, the singleton pattern, where you would have a, say, global singleton type of structure where you can access data. Now, that's also very frowned upon in certain circles, because of the issue that comes with thread-based programming and singletons. Now, what people would do is that they will declare a singleton somewhere with a bunch of state, and then they will have something like a thread, or it doesn't even have to be thread-based programming. It can just be that they have a singleton that can have mutatable values that get mutated. And you might ask, why is that the problem? Well, the problem is that if you have a really complicated structure, you're working on module A, and that's mutating a value that module B expects to be in a different state, and they kind of miss each other, they don't really communicate, and all of a sudden one piece of software code is mutating something another piece of software needs in order to do its job in the correct manner. That's where you get these kind of inconsistencies and a lot of very tricky bugs to deal with. So you should know that the people who are naysayers to global state have a very good reason for it, and it is absolutely a rule you should take to heart. But I will tell you that there are circumstances where I've found it to be very useful to have a global of some sort. I am not saying that there's not another way to solve this, but I have so far found that making something like these sort of things globally accessible to be very useful in my own application development. So, what are these things? Well, if we say that we're going to scope this to front end to start off with, something that I find very useful is that if I have, say, a translation object, say that I have a big object or a map or something of that nature with a bunch of translations or something of that nature, I have, say, a function that I need to input a token, a key of some sort, and then depending on which locale I have and so forth, I need to get back a translated string. That makes a very nice global. Because it's some translated text in, say, a React application or so forth, is so common that it literally is almost everywhere. Almost every single component you make will have some type of user-facing properties. It's actually what to me, it makes a lot of sense to have that as a global. You can also make there's other ways to get around that, but that could be a nice global. Depending on, like in React land, you would probably put it maybe on the context. You can pass it through as a prop as well, or you can require it as an import. There are many ways that you can do you can do many things with this, but it is something that I think that, yeah, it could make a nice global. The same thing goes for the state. The state can also be a globally scoped thing. You don't have to do it in, say, React land, but if you say that you're not working in React, say that you're working in vanilla JavaScript, well, then it's actually kind of okay. But then you're going to ask me, well, Fredrik, didn't you just 5 minutes ago, well, not even 5 minutes ago, 1 minute ago, say that there was all these issues with race conditions and you're mutating things right and left on the global state if you have a singleton pattern, for example? I mean, this goes true for Java and C# and the other languages as well. Isn't that going to be an issue? And I say, yes, you're absolutely right. But let's consider what we're saying here. So the problem isn't really that there's a global state. That's very convenient to be able to read a value whenever we need it. That's really, really useful to just read that value everywhere. Because if it's a value that we need to access very often from all kinds of different contexts, we can either have it globally available or we pass it around. We still need the value. So what's the issue? Well, the issue comes when you mutate it. When you start writing and mutating the value itself. That's the core issue here. And all I can say is that from the applications that I've built, not only in React and not only in JavaScript, but also in Java, Kotlin, Swift, and so forth, I've found to follow basically the Redux pattern of message dispatching and having a global state that is basically using the pub subsystem, it has been very effective. I mean, in Swift, for example, I just made my own implementation of Redux to do this sort of thing, and it's been working out very nicely. Because the issue comes, as I was describing earlier, is if you make a change to a value that module A is using, and then module B needs it to be in another state, if you're not communicating between these two modules, that's where the problem lies. But if you have a message dispatch that informs everybody who needs that value that, hey, it changed now, then they can account for that. And that's usually, at least for me, it's solved my problem. So what am I saying with this little video? Well, I'm saying that globals are something you should avoid, but there are situations where you absolutely should consider having them. The most common ones, as I said, is translations, global state where you need to know what the state of the program is. Sessions, for example, being able to know what roles and access rights your user has. There's all kinds of situations where a global is a valid solution. The thing that I want you to take away from this is that the mindset you should have is that you should try to avoid it if it is at all possible. But if it's pragmatic to have something as a global, then make it a global. You just be very aware of that you try to keep it read only, because if you start, that's the problem. The problem with globals comes when you start to mutate them. Because if you start mutating them, that's when usually in my experience, that's where all these issues comes from. So if you keep them read-only, they're very safe. If you need to mutate them, if you have a global that you need to change from some piece of software somewhere, then you need to create a pub subsystem, like Redux, for example, so that everybody who needs that value can be informed that, hey, somebody's trying to change this value now. Are you ready for it? If you follow those rules, or at least when I follow those rules, I don't really have much of problems with globals. That's at least from my experience. Have a great day.